So in the previous verses, up to 115, Jesus is there with the apostles. And then we get to verse 116. And as Allah said, O Isa, son of Miriam, did thou say to humans, take me and my mother as two deities apart from Allah? Now, that one, it looks like Jesus is now in heaven and God is speaking directly to him. You can actually say, well, maybe he's actually on earth, but now that we have discussed what happened before, I think it is more plausible that the story was flowing through in a somewhat linear manner. So he was with the apostles, he gets the Holy Spirit to them, and then he's in heaven speaking, basically giving account to God. And the very first thing seems to be attacking a very weird form of the Trinity, which nobody actually believes in, which is did you tell people to take you and your mother as two deities. So this is attacking a trinity that doesn't exist, and it is a point of much controversy with Christian apologists, always saying, well, the Quran doesn't understand the Trinity because Mary is not and has never been part of the Trinity. So this is kind of nonsense. But then we keep reading. He said, question mark, it is not for me to say what is not for me by truth. Again, this by truth thing that appears a lot. If I was saying it, then thou hast already known it. Thou know what is in myself, and I do not know what is in thyself. Surely thou art the continuous knower of absences. Now, I mean, this verse has problems left, right, and center. For starters, why would an all-knowing God be asking a question? Did you ask them? Did you tell people to worship you and your mother as gods? And he's like, okay. First of all, why is God asking that question when he already knows the answer? If it was the other way around, imagine that God wanted to pull you up on something and then he tells you, oh, did you do this thing? The answer will be like, yes, because, and you know. But for God to actually ask a question to Jesus, did you ask them to worship you and your mother? And Jesus said, no, of course not. It's like that is a very, very weird interaction with God. So it makes no sense. And then
I
Jesus
suppose,
is saying,
Jesse, just to jump in, I suppose so, but we do have, I mean, there is many cases, like, so this case has been made by atheists against Christianity as well, because we see God ask questions, and the idea is, oh, an all-knowing God, why is he asking a question? Well, it's rhetoric, it's to get the human to think, right? It's guiding them along a thought process. So I don't think that necessarily that's like a too crazy of a thing that's happening here.
Yeah. Okay. So, fine. So then we have this conversation. It to me it does sound like this now happening like in heaven,
Yeah.
and that's it. There is no Hawariyuns that happen after, So we have the first things about the table being descended, which sounds very much like the spirit and the punishment. And now this conversation is going on, and then it continues with Isa saying, "I did not say to them except thou hast commanded me by that." Oh, that's interesting. And the words then are, serve Allah, my Lord and your Lord. And it's like, okay, well, that's very interesting. That's very, very interesting indeed. However, when we see that by that, it doesn't make any sense. I did not say to them except what thou hast commanded me by that. Sorry, by what? By the table? There is, it means nothing. Now, the thing is that that word that is the same word that in Arabic is used as him, is the same. So in Arabic, by that is bihi. So by reading it in this manner, that thou hast commanded me by that, it makes absolutely no sense. But if you read this as thou hast commanded me by him, now we are having the proper split of natures which these people seem to really believe in because they were for need of a better word, Nestorians, but very weird. So now if we see that Jesus is in front of God the Father or Allah, and he's saying, well, all that I have said to people is what you told me to say by him. Who is him? The word, maybe the spirit, because these people are heretical, but now it makes sense that he's having that conversation with Allah. Would you agree with that reading?
Yes, precisely. Because, okay, like we were saying about him saying Allahumma, now he's speaking to the plurality of God. And hence, for him to say by him speaking to Allah that would make sense for him to say that I only said what I was commanded to say by your word or by your spirit, being him, right? So it's an agent. It's not a thing, right? Because we've talked about, like we were saying, about be he. So he in that or be who or be he. The H there, what it acts as is either him or it, right? So therefore, it's either that or him. You see that? So this ambiguity is something that is only read into the text contextually. So therefore, Murad translates it to what seems to make the most sense, and he puts that. We would, however, argue that him here would make more sense.
Right. And certainly that or him, it would actually have to be explained. Like, what is it? Like he's told him by what exactly? What does it mean that? And if it is, well, that is the spirit of Ogevine, or by knowledge, or by what? There must have been something, but it is not described. And when we see the previous verses, that it seems to be talking to the apostles in the world, and then he asked for the spirit to come down, and then he's in heaven speaking with God. It really looks like they separated the natures, and that this was very much people making a difference of Isa and the spirit. Anyway, we can talk about the natures in a bit. So let's actually just continue with this. Then in this verse, it then just continues with Isa saying to God, I was a witness over them for as long as I was there, and now you can do whatever you want. Punish them if you want to punish them, or forgive them if you want to forgive them. You know, it's all up to you. They are your servants anyway. So it looks like it is Jesus speaking to the Father. Nothing more in there. Table doesn't actually appear again. A very, very important thing. It has the name. The name is actually used in Asura, and the table doesn't appear again. So, and anyway, and then moving on to the last section, which is this. This is actually, by the way, so Maida, Al Maida, the this section about the table is at the very end of the surah. Most surahs they would actually be somewhere in there, but this looks almost like they didn't know what to call that particular book, and in the end they ended up, okay, well, this thing at the very end, let's call it Al Maida, because it's not talking about this until the what is it, verse 112 out of 120. So anyway, so there you go.
Then we're reading now in verse 119 of Surah 5. Allah said, "This day benefits the authentic ones. Their authenticity for them are gardens from beneath, which rivers run outlasting in it forever." So we're speaking about heaven here, obviously, as the benefit for the authentic ones. And then we read, Allah was satisfied about them, and they were satisfied about him. That is the great win. And here, what I would say is that reading this in a very in a sin manner, like standard Islamic narrative, there's something problematic about it, right? You can see because it's saying that Allah was satisfied about them, as if what they're doing satisfies Allah, right? Which you can make it work. It's not crazy, right? You can make it work. However, I would argue that this is very New Testament theology, right? It's that that Allah was satisfied about them because they were satisfied about Him, where Him would refer to then the act of the sacrifice potentially, but maybe not, because it would refer to the word. They deny the passion of the word being there in the passion. It's not totally clear, but yeah, we'll leave it there. Then we read in the next verse 5:120. For Allah is the kingdom of the skies and the earth, and all that is in them, presumably. And He is a determiner over everything. But one second, wait. If Murad's not putting it, that's for a very interesting reason, right? Wait. For Allah is the kingdom of the skies and the earth, and is in them, and He is a determiner over everything. Wait, is this saying that Allah is in the skies and the earth?
I have no idea what that means. It's like that in them is in them is sorry, is that supposed to be read as everything that is in the skies and the earth is for him, or is him really in those, or
Right.
is him in people? It's just very, very confusing.
Right.
It
I
can
didn't
be
notice
done.
it before, so I haven't investigated that aspect of it. It's just, yeah, that's definitely something that I'm going to have to look into. Now, I'm guessing it's fikum, right, in them. So we saw fikum in other instances of the messenger being in them, right? So that's interesting. Okay, cool, right? So this would make sense for her to say is in them, because we just read earlier about the Holy Spirit being sent, right? So contextually, that would actually make sense now that I think about it, right? To say after you're speaking about Al-Maida, or not Al-Maida, just Maida, Maidhu, Maidhe, right? Being sent down. In context, it would make sense to say that he is in the kingdom of the skies and the earth because the Holy Spirit is him, and therefore is God, and therefore the Holy Spirit is in the kingdom, and therefore he is in them, as in them being the skies and the earth, right? So that is definitely something worth looking at, because this is all totally impromptu. I didn't see that, but it would make sense in context.
Yeah, in the translations, I think they render that as everything in the skies and the earth and everything that is in there. So I don't think that Murad would have missed a word and is supposed to read, and everything is in them.
Right.
So how it is read, that thing which is in them has to be the subject. So if for
Right.
Allah is the kingdom of the skies and the earth and is in them, it would be like, and he is in them.
Yeah.
There seems to be a problem there, but we know that the language in the Quran is very magical, so it can mean many things, but it's certainly something we need to look into. What I would say about the previous verse is the expression of this day, because it appears a number of times in the Quran, and every time that something says this day, it looks like they know exactly what is happening. In fact, there's a verse that says, this day I have completed the religion for you. And it's like, okay, but after that, you still had another like 40 surahs to reveal. So it's very inaccurate. So after what we have seen, with the apostles, with the table, which is the spirit descending and so on, all of that argument. And then we have this verse with Allah saying, this day benefits the authentic ones. The way that I interpret that, the only day that would make sense is something to do with the crucifixion, with the resurrection, with sending down the spirit, something about that. And I think probably Daif International says the day of resurrection, or one of the guys I think says on the day of resurrection will benefit the authentic ones, when he's talking about something in the past tense, on the time of the apostles plus minus 2 weeks.
Right. Now that I think about it, yeah, it would be weird to say that in past tense Allah said this day benefits, right? Because I presumably maybe a nominal sentence. I don't know exactly, right? Because but it's most certainly not explicitly future tense, right? It would make sense if like Allah said this day in the future, or this day will benefit, but it's just this day benefits, right? So it does seem, now that I'm looking at it like this, right? It does seem okay. Maybe it's baptism. That's when the fount of the Holy Spirit is, dwells within Christ, or it's the day of the crucifixion in some manner where they're, harmonizing their rejection of the suffering of the divine word, but they still see the flesh of Christ as being the ultimate sacrifice, and hence that's the day that benefits the authentic ones, which are those who accepted Christ as Messiah and not being the Yahudi who rejected them, right? So hence the authentic ones would have been the Notzrim in their like conception of their history and their tradition, as being the authentic ones who were the Jews who accepted Messiah. So there's it could be the baptism, could be the crucifixion. I don't quite know, but that's a good point about how this day we could look at that particular phraseology and cross-reference all of the instances and all the contexts it's used. We can probably very quickly find which day exactly it's talking about.
Yeah, actually, I should have added as well the verse here because it flows through correctly. The one that's the Quran says, and those who follow Isa will be the uppermost until the end of times. And it's like, yes, you actually get the Quran and you put it all, say, in order. You understand what it's saying. He's talking about the authentic ones. He's talking about the apostles as the clean ones, the pure ones. And then you have to go to even Hasam in the 10th century to say, no, all of everything that they have is completely corrupt because they are following Paul. And it's like, well, we're reading the Quran, and the Quran is not attacking Paul at all. In fact, it's being very complimentary to the apostles. It's talking a lot about the Spirit. Everything seems to be like very, very clear. And actually, like
Oh,
Elegance with Grace is commenting here, is
good
like,
point,
yes.
Grace. Yeah. So
Then
we'll look at this then. So I haven't. I mean, I have a suspicion. I have the answer in a sense. It's just that I don't know the exact specific rendering we're looking at. So I'll explain what we're looking at here. This is a process that I've been doing essentially. It's been very fruitful. I think I did some numbers quickly. Around 80% of the attempts I use this method, we get fruitful outcomes that make more sense of the context than the silly standard reading, right? So silly or Syriac, it seems that I have a like an 80% success rate so far, so it's not coincidental. So anyway, so that's the method we're looking at here is that. That method is to take a word that you want to investigate. So say you were looking at the word Maida, right? So you would open up Quran.com, look at the verse, you see, okay, that's the word Maida, but you don't stop there, right? The next step is to look at the earliest manuscripts. I would suggest as a recommendation to look at Wettstein 1913, just because it was found by a German, and hence, if there were any problems with the manuscript text, it's good that it was found by a non-Muslim. We'll put it that way, right? As in, it wouldn't have been destroyed. So, and that's where we find Aziz instead of Uzair as an example. Anyway, point being is that you don't just stop at what the Hafs tells you in the modern day is the spelling. You go to the original manuscript. So you look around a couple manuscripts, you get a gist of how exactly it's written in the Arabic script, and then you render each consonant into the cognate consonant. There's some, a nuance here about, one consonant could be one or many consonants in the Syriac. You've got to play around and figure it out, right? With a simple rule, and that rule is for the definite articles, which we spoke about prior, right? In that episode about the definite articles, you have to render the definite article when you find it into the suffix a. So if you have like what's a good example? Al-Aziz, right? If it's Al-Aziz, you would write it as Aziza in terms of how you would cognate it into the Syriac. So, point being, in this case, we don't really have the definite article, so that's just giving you more, details about the process. But yeah, so what we're looking at is looking at Syriac script renderings of the possible original Syriac script that this word would have been pointing to, right? So like I said, we have mim, alif, ya, dal, and then the ending marbuta. So what we're looking at here is on the left side for the Syriac script, you can see 3 words there. The first word is the harsh T, so you can kind of ignore that. I just sort of put it there as like, maybe that's an option. But the 2 and the second and the third are what we're focusing on. So to look at the second one, this is me running it with the assumption that the marbuta was meant to be the T marbuta. And the thing is that basically with the T okay, the shape of the marbuta in the early manuscripts is just a circle at the end of a word. And hence, it's either an H if there's no dots, or if you put the 2 dots above it, it becomes a T. So the ambiguity there in terms of orthography is what I'm accounting for by, juggling the 2 possibilities that it's either a tau, that's the Syriac script for the T. That's the second row you see there at the very left side of the word. It's kind of similar to the one above it, right? But it has a slightly different shape, and hence this is the softer T. So the first one is the emphatic ta, and the second one is this is the soft T. So this would be something like my det or my te. I can't pronounce that, I'm afraid. But what we have here is mim, alif, ya, dal, and then the soft T. And this word would mean confirmation or strengthening. Along those lines, I'll elaborate even further. And then the third row, that's when you replace the tau with the ha, so the H letter. This is the soft H, not the frictive H. Then what you would end up with is like my he or my de. And this would mean his confirmation, his strengthening, or his witness, something like this, right? And the idea here is that the T suffix in the Syro-Aramaic serves the function of abstraction. It's like in English when we say IOM, like confirmation, right? Rather than confirmer, right? Which would be the cognate in the English of the third row. Confirming, confirmed. So to explain a little bit, so the T suffix makes the abstraction, so you get confirmation. The H suffix is rendered as the second person singular, so that's like his, right? So therefore it would become his confirmation. And to just elaborate very briefly on why confirmation, it comes from the fact that the root of the word here is the alif, ya, dal, the AYD, and that's in the middle of the word, right? That has the meaning of hand, right? And the idea here is like, can you give me a hand? We have this expression in English as well, right? So the idea of a hand can be used also for helper or helping. Can you help me? Can you give me a hand? And the M prefix here hence renders it into this form of confirm or witness or help or lend a hand, something like that, right? So therefore, you get a general gist of the semantic scope to mean something along the lines, as you see here, of either, in the T case, confirmation, or in the H case, his confirmer or his witness. It says confirmation there, could potentially also be read like that in English. Point being is that then we read it and say, instead of it saying to send down a table, it would read to send down, confirmation, or to send down his confirmer, or to send down his witness, or like I said, with the whole idea of helping a hand or lending a hand, you could also read it maybe as a helper, or whatever, right? We see that language used for the Holy Spirit. All long story short, the semantic scope works for language that was used by the Syriac textual tradition for the Holy Spirit. So we see the Holy Spirit as being kind of like the confirmation of Christ in a way, right? Like he's the witness over, of the word, maybe. So how you have the Son witnesses for the Father, the Father witnesses for the Son, and then when Christ leaves, he sends the Holy Spirit to continuously remind and bear fruits, and that could be seen as a confirmation, right? So the Holy Spirit indwells me. I live a better life that confirms the goodness and the authenticity of where this came from. That came from God, so forth and so forth, right? So in that context, you can read it as the Holy Spirit, and hence grace. You would be 100% correct in our opinion.